The courtroom was silent in a way that felt unnatural. Not the ordinary quiet of legal procedure, but the kind that presses against the chest, where every breath feels louder than it should. The judge had stopped mid-sentence. His pen hovered above the legal pad, unmoving. Across the room, attorneys exchanged glances they tried and failed to hide. At the defense table sat one of the most powerful men in the modern world, a figure synonymous with innovation, ambition, and disruption. And for the first time since the proceedings began, even he looked uncertain. What the court had just uncovered was not part of the original case file. It was not mentioned in the opening statements, and it raised a question that no one in that room was prepared to answer out loud. How far can influence stretch before it becomes a threat to the system meant to regulate it? Outside the courthouse, life continued with mechanical indifference. Traffic moved. Phones buzzed. Markets opened and closed. But inside, a narrative years in the making was finally being forced into the open. This was never supposed to become public. What began as a routine federal inquiry, one of dozens launched each year, had quietly transformed into one of the most closely watched legal battles in modern corporate history. Not because of spectacle, but because of what it represented. The man at the center of it all had built his reputation on defying gravity, sometimes literally. To admirers, he was a visionary. To critics, a reckless disruptor. To regulators, he had long been a complicated figure, cooperative when it suited him, combative when it didn't. His daily life, at least on the surface, appeared relentlessly structured. Early mornings, tightly scheduled meetings, briefings that blurred corporate strategy with technological ambition. Family life existed in fragments, carefully protected from public view. Associates described him as intensely focused, often distant, rarely spontaneous. There were no obvious warning signs, at least none that seemed alarming at the time. The federal agencies involved would later admit that the first red flags were subtle. A delayed disclosure here, an internal memo there, nothing that screamed misconduct. Just patterns that didn't quite align. Analysts noticed irregular market movements following certain public statements. Labor complaints that appeared, unrelated on paper, but echoed the same concerns when read closely. Security briefings that raised questions no one initially wanted to escalate. Everything, individually, was explainable. Together, they formed a shape that made experienced investigators uneasy. At first, the inquiry stayed small. A handful of regulators. A limited scope. Standard requests or documentation. The company's legal team responded promptly, confidently. Meetings were cordial, cooperative, the kind of professional engagement that often leads nowhere. But behind closed doors, junior analysts were noticing inconsistencies that senior officials hadn't yet connected. Timelines that didn't quite fit. Communications that suggested decisions were being made earlier than officially acknowledged. It was slow, methodical work, the kind that rarely makes headlines, but often determines outcomes. When the first former employee agreed to speak, the tone of the investigation shifted. Not dramatically, not publicly, just enough for internal notes to change language. Words like review quietly became assessment. Assessment became evaluation. And eventually, evaluation became something heavier. The witness didn't describe a single dramatic incident. Instead, they spoke about pressure, expectations that were never written down, instructions delivered in implication rather than instruction, a culture where questioning decisions felt professionally dangerous. Investigators knew better than to jump to conclusions. They had seen cases collapse under the weight of assumption before. Every claim was cross-checked, every document verified. Digital records were analyzed not for what they said, but for when they were created and when they were altered. Weeks turned into months, months into a year. At several points, the case nearly stalled. There were moments when supervisors considered closing the file entirely. The evidence was circumstantial, complex, easy to misinterpret. But then came the emails. They weren't dramatic. No confessions. No explicit wrongdoing. Just ordinary corporate language exchanged at unusual times, referencing decisions that didn't align with public disclosures. A pattern emerged not of a single illegal act, but of a system operating just close enough to the edge to make regulators uncomfortable. Still, discomfort is not a crime. The legal threshold was higher, much higher. The turning point didn't come from within the company at all. It came from an external expert witness, someone brought in to analyze market behavior independently. Their findings suggested that certain public communications had predictable, measurable impacts that benefited specific positions held internally. The court would later hear arguments on whether this was intent or coincidence. But inside the investigative team, the realization was sobering. If proven, this wasn't just about corporate governance. It was about responsibility at the highest level. By the time subpoenas were issued, the case was no longer quiet. Media interest surged. Public opinion fractured along familiar lines. Supporters dismissed the investigation as persecution. Critics argued it was long overdue. Inside the courtroom, none of that mattered. Only facts did. Or at least what could be proven as such. And then, near the end of a long evidentiary session, something unexpected surfaced, something even seasoned prosecutors hadn't anticipated. A document referenced in testimony but never formally submitted. A gap in the record that demanded explanation. The judge's pause wasn't theatrical. It was instinctive. A signal that the court itself needed to reconsider what it thought this case was truly about. Because sometimes, the most important questions are not the ones asked at the beginning, but the ones that surface when the story is nearly complete. The courtroom settled into a tense rhythm as attorneys began presenting their more technical arguments. Charts, graphs, and internal communications lit up projection screens. Every slide, every highlighted passage had been scrutinized countless times before it reached this stage. Yet even here, with the public gallery observing silently, the impact was profound. Observers could feel the weight of power, influence, and responsibility pressing down, not as abstract concepts, but as tangible realities affecting the lives of millions. The tech billionaire maintained his composed demeanor, but subtle shifts in his posture betrayed a mind constantly calculating, anticipating, responding to every implied accusation. Witness after witness recounted details that, on the surface, seemed ordinary. A stock option approved earlier than officially disclosed. An internal memo vaguely suggesting regulatory priorities. A suggestion that employee concerns be addressed internally, quietly, rather than publicized. Taken alone, these instances would seem trivial, almost procedural. Taken together, patterns emerged, patterns that the prosecution argued demonstrated intent, oversight, and accountability lapses that could not be ignored. The defense countered with precision, emphasizing the chaotic complexity of a global corporation, the inevitability of miscommunications, and the absence of direct malice. It was a battle not of moral certainty, but of evidence and interpretation. Throughout the proceedings, the public scrutiny intensified. News outlets dissected every argument, every facial expression, every subtle gesture. Analysts debated what certain emails really meant. Share prices fluctuated in response to perceived advantages or disadvantages revealed in court. Yet the courtroom itself remained insulated from the external noise. Inside, reality was slower, deliberate, and uncompromising. Decisions could not be based on public sentiment. They could only be grounded in verifiable fact. A particularly striking moment came when a former executive took the stand. Their testimony initially appeared innocuous, recounting internal meetings, the order of strategic decisions, and the rationale for prioritizing certain markets. But beneath the measured tone, a deeper narrative emerged. They described pressure, not explicit directives to break laws, but a relentless push to achieve results under immense scrutiny. Emails corroborated portions of their statements, timestamps aligning precisely with their recollections. The cumulative effect was subtle, yet undeniable. The court began to see not just a series of isolated incidents, but a corporate culture in which the boundaries between aggressive strategy and legal responsibility were tested repeatedly. Investigators had spent months reconstructing timelines, correlating communications with external market movements, and cross-referencing testimony. Analysts traced the sequence of decisions that led to regulatory alerts. They examined labor disputes alongside operational memos. Each data point on its own told a fragment of the story. Combined, they portrayed a web of actions and reactions that challenged the notion of corporate infallibility. The human element, the ambition, the fear of failure, the drive for innovation became as central to the narrative as any email or ledger entry. Amid this procedural rigor, psychological insights became crucial. Experts called to the stand analyzed patterns of decision-making, group dynamics, and leadership pressures. They emphasized the interplay between cognitive bias and corporate ambition, illustrating how even well-intentioned actions could inadvertently cross legal and ethical lines. Observers, from jurors to journalists, were given a rare glimpse into the mental landscape of high-stakes executive life, revealing the subtle interplay between power, judgment, and consequence. The turning point, however, came not from analysis or testimony, but from an unforeseen revelation buried deep within internal communications. A memo, initially overlooked, indicated that certain warnings from regulatory bodies had been delayed in circulation. The implications were immediate. Decisions made with incomplete information potentially influenced strategic outcomes, raising questions about oversight and accountability. The court's attention sharpened. Murmurs of disbelief circulated discreetly among legal aides. Even the judge, seasoned and composed, paused to consider the ramifications. What initially seemed procedural had taken on profound legal and moral significance. As the trial progressed, interrogation of key figures revealed more than facts. They revealed tensions, fears, and the cognitive dissonance inherent in managing a global enterprise under intense scrutiny. The billionaire's responses were precise, measured, and carefully worded, yet humanizing glimpses appeared in micro-expressions. A tightened jaw when confronted with discrepancies, a momentary hesitation before acknowledging ambiguity. These subtle cues, cataloged meticulously by observers, painted a portrait of leadership both formidable and fallible. Evidence presentation became a narrative in itself. Internal emails, market analyses, and expert reports were woven together into a tapestry demonstrating the convergence of influence, strategic ambition, and the responsibilities owed to regulators, employees, and the public. Each exhibit, each line of questioning, contributed to the slow unfolding of the story. Not a sensationalized scandal, but a complex examination of accountability at the highest level. Every participant, prosecutors, defense lawyers, witnesses, and the judge played a role in revealing the layers of human behavior behind corporate decisions. The climax approached as final witnesses summarized their findings. Analysts explained correlations between communication timing and market movements. Former executives reflected on the ethical dilemmas they face daily. The courtroom felt suspended, poised on the edge of judgment, as the narrative coalesced into a single, coherent picture of systemic patterns, decision-making under pressure, and the intricate web connecting innovation to oversight. The public followed in rapt attention, social commentary surging outside, yet within, the trial adhered strictly to methodical exposition. Finally, the judge's summation emphasized a balance between intent and outcome. Legal reasoning was carefully articulated. The boundaries between aggressive innovation and regulatory compliance, the responsibility inherent in leading vast enterprises, and the broader implications for corporate governance. Sentencing or remediation discussions focused not on punitive spectacle but on corrective and preventive measures, ensuring that accountability, education, and transparency remained central. Outside the courtroom, the case sparked discourse. Academic panels debated executive ethics, media dissected procedural outcomes, and corporate boards revisited internal compliance structures. Public opinion was divided, yet the essential lesson remained clear. Even in the most powerful positions, actions are scrutinized, accountability is unavoidable, and influence carries consequences beyond personal ambition. The final reflection brought the narrative full circle. Power, responsibility, and justice intersect in ways that define not only individuals, but the systems around them. The story concluded without celebration or condemnation, but with a recognition of complexity, the weight of leadership, and the enduring necessity of oversight. As the courtroom emptied and the public digest unfolded, a single resonant truth persisted. In the pursuit of ambition, every decision leaves a trace, and justice, though often delayed, remains an inescapable measure of accountability. As the trial entered its final weeks, the courtroom became a stage for the most intense moments yet. Attorneys moved with precision, but beyond the technicalities of law, a human drama unfolded. Witnesses testified with calm professionalism, yet their words carried weight beyond facts. They revealed the pressures, the ethical dilemmas, and the subtle influence of immense power on human decisions. The billionaire's demeanor remained controlled, almost unreadable, but each carefully chosen word and deliberate pause hinted at the tension underneath, a tension that had been building for years, quietly, until now. Evidence presented in the final days revealed a complex narrative of decisions and consequences. Internal emails, some mundane, some strategically ambiguous, were examined against the backdrop of regulatory concerns and market activity. Experts demonstrated correlations and timelines that suggested systemic patterns rather than isolated errors. Even the judge, experienced in handling high-profile litigation, leaned forward, absorbing the intricate layers of corporate operation, intertwined with legal obligations. Observers noted that the courtroom had transformed from a procedural space into a lens on accountability, ethics, and the human elements behind global influence. The turning point arrived when an overlooked internal report was introduced. It indicated that warnings from federal regulators had been received months earlier but were delayed in circulation within the company. While no law was explicitly broken, the implications for oversight and corporate responsibility were profound. The prosecution argued that these delays, intentional or not, reflected a pattern of negligence and disregard for regulatory compliance. The defense countered with arguments emphasizing corporate complexity, volume of communications, and lack of malicious intent. The tension between intent and outcome became the fulcrum on which the case pivoted. Throughout the proceedings, psychological and behavioral insights played a crucial role. Experts described how high-pressure environments can distort perception, encourage risk-taking, and create blind spots even among experienced leaders. They emphasized that corporate culture is a reflection of both ambition and governance structures. The court witnessed a rare exposition of the human mind navigating unprecedented levels of influence, responsibility, and ethical ambiguity. This testimony, combined with the painstakingly documented patterns of communication, brought the story to its most compelling point. The intersection of power and accountability is neither simple nor absolute. It is fraught with challenge, nuance, and moral consequence. As closing arguments approached, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Prosecutors highlighted patterns of oversight failures, the timing of disclosures, and the potential consequences of unchecked corporate power. Defense attorneys underscored the absence of malicious intent, the innovation-driven pressures, and the unprecedented scale of decision-making in global operations. Both sides presented their cases not just as arguments about facts, but as reflections on responsibility, ethics, and the expectations society places on those who wield significant influence. The final verdict was delivered with measured clarity. The judge summarized the evidence, acknowledging the complexity of the case and the nuances inherent in balancing ambition with accountability. The ruling focused on corrective measures, structured compliance reforms, enhanced reporting protocols, and personal accountability where appropriate. There was no dramatic declaration of guilt in the sensational sense, no triumphal exclamations. Instead, the outcome emphasized the principles of justice, responsibility, and the lessons to be drawn from close scrutiny of power in action. In the aftermath, reactions were varied. Public discourse intensified, with commentators debating the implications for corporate governance, regulatory enforcement, and executive responsibility. Academic forums analyzed the case as a model for ethical oversight and risk management. Within the company, leadership reviewed protocols and implemented reforms designed to prevent recurrence of similar issues. Employees observed both the impact of scrutiny and the message that accountability transcends status, wealth, or influence. For those who followed the story closely, the most enduring lesson was human. Power carries weight, and influence demands responsibility. The billionaire, for all his success, had been reminded that even extraordinary achievement does not exempt one from the consequences of oversight. The court had not punished ambition, innovation, or vision, but it had affirmed the imperative of transparency, diligence, and ethical conduct. As the final session concluded, the courtroom emptied quietly. The public, journalists, and participants alike left with a shared understanding that justice, though deliberate and slow, had been served responsibly. In reflecting on the months of investigation, testimony, and deliberation, one principle emerged clearly. Systems exist to ensure that power, no matter how great, is exercised within boundaries that respect law, ethics, and human consequence. The story of this case, while rooted in real-world inspired circumstances, offered broader insight into the intersection of corporate ambition and legal responsibility. It reminded observers that oversight is essential not to punish innovation, but to ensure that the mechanisms of accountability function effectively. It illustrated that ethical challenges in high-stakes environments require constant vigilance, disciplined analysis, and the courage to act when systems falter. Ultimately, the narrative closed not with a flourish of triumph, but with reflection. The court had done its duty. The company had been held accountable, and those who observed the process, from analysts to ordinary citizens, were left with a resonant understanding. Influence and ambition are inseparable from responsibility, and justice, though often slow and meticulous, remains the cornerstone of trust in complex societies. The case would be studied for years, not as a story of villainy or scandal, but as a testament to the enduring importance of ethical oversight, investigative diligence, and the profound consequences that come when human ambition meets structured accountability. And in that quiet reflection, a single, undeniable truth persisted. No matter how high one rises, every decision leaves a mark, every action echoes, and justice steady, deliberate, and inevitable remains a measure of responsibility that transcends wealth, fame, and power.